Emily Carter had always thought of her grandfather's farm as a peaceful place. That time had forgotten. She hadn't been there in nearly 10 years, but she still remembered the smell of fresh hay, the squeaky front porch swing, and the creaky barn doors that opened with a reluctant groan. It was a quiet patch of land tucked just outside of town. Nothing fancy, it's just acres of green, an old farmhouse, and memories. That quiet was shattered when a large white envelope arrived in her mailbox, marked with bold red letters, "Final notice of payment due." She stood in her apartment kitchen. The letter spread across the counter. At first, she thought it had to be some kind of mistake. A homeowners association was demanding $450,000 in unpaid fees tied to the farm. According to the letter, the association claimed her grandfather had signed into a planned community called Blue Willow Estates, which now included shared recreational developments and infrastructure. Emily read the letter twice more. The terms were unfamiliar: assessments, development fees, community investment dues. None of it made any sense. Her grandfather had never lived in a planned community. He'd lived in the same small house for over 50 years, growing tomatoes and watching the same black and white television set that never quite got the Weather Channel right. Confused and unsettled, she called the number listed at the bottom of the letter. A polite woman answered and directed her to the association's legal department. A man named Thomas politely explained that she had inherited not just the land, but also the obligations connected to it. "Your grandfather joined the Blue Willow Estates HOA in 2019, he said. The fees cover his share of the property's upgrades, including road paving, pool installation, fitness facilities, and landscape maintenance. We sent multiple notices before his passing." Emily frowned. "Was in the hospital for months before he passed," she said. "Could barely hold a pen. Are you saying he agreed to this?" "That's what the documents say," Thomas replied. "We'd be happy to email you the signed agreement and a breakdown of the charges." Emily jotted down his email and ended the call feeling like she had just stepped into someone else's life. She pulled up her calendar. The funeral had been just 6 weeks ago. She had barely finished going through his will, and now this. She didn't wait. That afternoon, Emily took a leave of absence from work, packed a bag, and made the 2-hour drive out to the farm. Her GPS showed the same winding roads, but when she turned onto the familiar gravel path that led to the farmhouse, she hit something unexpected: a security gate. She slowed down, unsure if she had taken a wrong turn. A man in a uniform stepped out of a small booth and approached her window. "Are you here for a tour or a reservation?" he asked. Emily blinked. "No. This is my grandfather's property." The guard looked at a clipboard, confused. "Name: Emily Carter. This is the Carter farm." Or it was. He glanced at the gatehouse, then back at her. "Oh, you'll want to speak with the main office. You're on the edge of Blue Willow Estates now." Emily pulled forward and parked near the old farmhouse, which still stood though surrounded now by new development. Wide concrete walkways connected to outdoor fountains and cabana-style buildings. A tennis court stood where her grandfather's old corn patch had been. It felt surreal. She climbed the porch steps and opened the creaky screen door just like she had as a child. Everything inside looked untouched. The smell of old wood and dust welcomed her like an echo from another time. She sat on the porch swing, holding the letter in one hand and her phone in the other. Whatever had happened here, she wasn't leaving. Until she found out. Emily woke the next morning to the sound of unfamiliar voices drifting through the open window. She pulled back the curtains and stared in disbelief. Just beyond the front porch, a group of guests dressed in matching robes walked past, sipping green smoothies. A staff member with a clipboard greeted them cheerfully as they headed toward what appeared to be a spa building that had sprung up where the old barn used to stand. It didn't feel like a farm anymore. It felt like a resort. She stepped outside and followed the sound of water. Within minutes, she found herself staring at a shimmering pool surrounded by umbrellas and lounge chairs. There were manicured hedges, water features, and a stone patio, with neatly placed tables and chairs. Soft instrumental music played through hidden speakers. Guests were reading, chatting quietly, and enjoying what looked like a high-end wellness retreat. A laminated sign near the pool caught her eye. Blue. Willow Estates members-only access restricted. Emily walked back toward the farmhouse, trying to process what she'd seen. This wasn't just a few upgrades. It was a full development: pools, walking trails, outdoor kitchens, even golf carts zipping around on paved paths. The peaceful farmland her grandfather had protected for decades had become part of something much bigger. And she had no idea how. Later that afternoon, she drove to the association's office, which was located in a sleek building near the main entrance to the estate. The receptionist greeted her warmly and directed her to an upstairs conference room. A man in a navy blue blazer introduced himself as Daniel Reese, the Director of Community Relations. "I understand you're the new owner of the Carter property," he said, offering a firm handshake. "Yes," Emily replied. "But I don't understand how any of this happened. I've been away, but I had no idea the land had been developed this way. I received a letter claiming my grandfather agreed to join the association. Is that true?" Daniel opened a folder and slid a few documents across the table. "These are the records on file, according to this. Mr. Carter voluntarily joined the Blue Willow Estates HOA in 2019. Here's his signed agreement and the recorded addendum showing that portions of the land were included in our master plan." Emily scanned the papers. The signature did look like her grandfather's, shaky but familiar. Still, something didn't sit right. "This says he agreed to include his property in your development," she said, "but my grandfather wasn't the kind of person to join anything, especially something like this. He was private. He liked the land just the way it was." Daniel gave a polite smile. "We understand, but we have to go by the documents. We send quarterly notices, billing, statements, and project updates. All standard procedure. If your grandfather had objections, they would have been noted here." "But he never said anything to me," Emily said. "And I visited him often during those last couple of years." Daniel offered a sympathetic nod. "Sometimes property owners feel overwhelmed by the process. We try to be transparent. If there's a misunderstanding, you're welcome to file a formal inquiry with our legal team. But as of now, the dues are considered active and overdue." Emily didn't respond. She stared at the papers again. The signature, was it real? Was it made while he was sick or recovering from something? Was he pressured? Daniel cleared his throat. "You have a beautiful piece of property. What we've built here brings a lot of value to the area. If you'd like, we can discuss refinancing options or payment plans to help with the balance." Emily stood up, collecting the documents. "I'm not agreeing to anything until I understand exactly what happened here." He nodded. "Of course. We're here to help however we can." Outside, the sun was beginning to set over the newly paved walkways and landscaped lawns. But for Emily, the shadows had only just started to appear. Something didn't add up, and she wasn't letting this go. Emily returned to the farmhouse with the documents tucked under her arm, her thoughts spinning. The signature on the agreement kept flashing through her mind. It looked like her grandfather's handwriting, at least on the surface. But there was something off about it. It was too neat, too clean. His signature had grown shakier in his later years, especially after his stroke in 2018. She made tea and sat at the kitchen table, laying out the papers in front of her. The agreement was stamped and dated, listing amenities and future development. Plans, road expansion, wellness facilities, shared recreational zones. All of it sounded polished and professional. Polished for a man who still wrote shopping lists on the backs of seed packets, beside the signature. There was a witness line signed by someone named Laura J. Danning. Emily had never heard the name before, According to the form, she was the notary who had overseen the signing. The date was barely a month after her grandfather's hospital stay. Something didn't add up. The next morning, Emily drove to the county records office downtown. The clerk behind the desk helped her locate the public record of the agreement, which had been filed and timestamped. Emily requested a certified copy. Then asked the clerk a question she hadn't expected to ask. Is there any way to check if a notary was actually present when a document was signed? The clerk gave a thoughtful nod. You'd have to contact the notary directly, but most notaries keep a logbook of their activity. If you have their name and the date, you can request verification. Emily jotted down the information and left her determination growing. She spent the rest of the day looking through her grandfather's filing cabinet in the study, searching for anything letters, notices, bills that mentioned Blue Willow Estates. There was nothing, no statements, no agreements, no envelopes bearing the HOA's logo. His records were otherwise meticulous bills from the power company stacked by year. That receipts from the old dog who'd passed years ago, even birthday cards she had mailed him. But there was no sign he had ever communicated with the association. She flipped through a small brown notebook he'd kept for years. In it, he had logged everything. When the corn was planted, which fences he repaired, even when the well had been tested. There was a note in the back that caught her eye. Met with someone about the road behind the barn. Seemed pushy. Told them no again. It was dated 2 months before the supposed agreement was signed. Emily stared at the note, her heart racing. This wasn't just confusion. It might be a mistake or something more serious. Later that evening, she called the number listed for the notary. Laura J. Danning. A man answered, saying she had retired and no longer worked as a notary. Emily asked if she could still be reached, and he offered an email address. She sent a polite message, including a photo of the agreement and a simple question. Do you remember witnessing the signature? She didn't expect an answer, right? Away, so she turned her attention to the back of the property. She hadn't walked the land yet, she'd been too focused on documents and meetings. But now she slipped on boots and headed down the familiar old trail behind the house. The gravel road was still there, though faded and overgrown. She followed it until she reached a sharp turn that led directly into the resort's parking area. A row of decorative hedges had been planted to cover the transition between old and new. But the curve of the road was the same. She took a slow breath. The old road hadn't disappeared, had just been hidden. As she turned back toward the farmhouse, her phone buzzed. 'Twas an email notification from Laura J. Danning. Subject: Re-notary verification. Hi Emily, thank you for reaching out. I never witnessed that signature. Emily's hand tightened around the phone. Now she had more than doubts, she had a reason to act. Emily sat on the farmhouse steps, staring at her phone as the glow of sunset spilled across the gravel road. The email from Laura Danning was short, but its meaning carried weight. I never witnessed that signature. She read it again just to be sure. Laura had confirmed that she was a licensed notary during the time. The HOA document was dated, but she hadn't signed off on that specific agreement. She had never met Emily's grandfather. Emily's heart pounded as she pulled up the scanned copy of the HOA agreement on her phone. There it was, Laura J. Danning's signature, clean and firm, along with a notary stamp that looked perfectly legitimate. But now, it was clear at least one part of this document wasn't real. She sent a reply asking if Laura would be willing to confirm that in writing. Within minutes, a new message arrived in her inbox. Yes, I'll send a signed letter tomorrow, confirming I wasn't involved in that notarization. Happy to help. Emily let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She was finally getting somewhere the next morning, with a clearer head. She decided to visit the one person who might have more insight into what had happened. Joe Mullins, the longtime neighbor who had lived next to her grandfather for over 30 years. Joe had known the land and its history better than anyone. She found him where she expected, on his porch, sipping coffee, a straw hat shielding his eyes from the morning sun. His weathered face brightened when he saw her. Well now, look who the wind blew in, Joe said with a grin. You've got your grandfather's walk. stubborn but steady. Emily returned the smile, but it faded quickly. I need to ask you something about the land. And about what happened here after Grandpa got sick? Joe nodded and motioned to the chair beside him. Go ahead. She explained the situation, the HOA letter, the resort, the agreement, and the questionable signature. Joe listened quietly, his expression shifting from casual to concerned. You're not wrong to question that paper, he said after a long pause. He never told me he was selling anything, and we talked just about every day. He was proud of that land, said it would stay in the family long after he was gone. Emily glanced out toward the distant buildings of the resort. Did anyone come around asking him to sell, or trying to get him to sign anything? Joe scratched his chin. There was a man who came by a few times, maybe 2 years before your granddad passed. Drove a black SUV, wore dress shoes even when the mud was thick. Told me he was part of a zoning advisory board. Never gave a card. One day, I saw him walking behind the barn, looking at the old gravel road like he owned it. That road was a part of the farm. Joe gave a short laugh. Of course it was. Your grandfather built it when he expanded the fence line back in the 90s. It's not just a road. It's part of an easement the county approved years ago, but the title stayed in his name. They paved over it without permission, if you ask me. Emily sat back, the pieces starting to fall into place. Her grandfather had refused to sell. The signature was likely forged. And now part of a resort had been built over a road the family still technically owned. Why didn't anyone say anything when the development started? She asked. Joe shrugged. They built slow, one building at a time, kept it quiet. The time people noticed, the whole thing looked official. And your granddad, he wasn't, well, I don't think he even knew how far it had gone. Emily stood, her thoughts racing. She had the notary's confirmation. She had Joe's word. And now, she had a reason to dig deeper. She looked out toward the resort. It was time to find out who had really signed that paper and what they stood to gain from it. Later that day, Emily walked the gravel path again, her boots crunching against stones her grandfather had poured by hand decades ago. The road stretched behind the house and curved around the back acreage before emerging, almost seamlessly, into the paved lanes of Blue Willow Estates. What stood out most wasn't how much had changed, was how much hadn't. The layout was the same. It's a gentle slope, the bend in the road. Even the 2 old oaks that had always framed the curve, they were still there, now trimmed and manicured, as if the developers had worked around them on purpose. Emily paused and looked down at the ground. On the far edge of the path, half covered by dirt and grass, she spotted a rusted marker. She knelt down and brushed it clean. It was a metal stake with faded paint, one of the original markers her grandfather had installed after filing an easement request with the county. She pulled out her phone. It took photos from every angle. If the road was part of an easement, that meant her grandfather had never relinquished ownership. The developers might have built over land they didn't fully control. Back at the house, a key, Emily opened her grandfather's records again. This time, she searched specifically for property maps, surveys, or correspondence with the county. In a dusty manila envelope tucked behind a stack of seed catalogs, she found what she was looking for, a county-approved map dated 1997, clearly showing the easement running from the barn to the southern edge of the property line, handwritten. In the margin, in her grandfather's familiar script, were the words, "Keep as is. Do not sell. Utility Retovway." That night, Emily called her attorney, Rachel Dinn, a property law specialist she'd hired in town. She forwarded the photos and documents. Along with the notary's email, Rachel called her back the next morning. "You have something here," she said. "The easement is still legally tied to your property. They've paved over it and built anything permanent without acquiring rights or compensating your grandfather. They could be liable." Emily exhaled slowly. "So we can fight this. We can definitely challenge their claim to dues. Rachel said. And depending on how far the construction extends onto your land, we may be able to file for unauthorized use. I'll start drafting a formal inquiry to their legal team. But there's something else. What? I did a little research into the Blue Willow Estates developer. The original permit requests were submitted by a company called Everfield Properties, which no longer exists. It was dissolved 2 years ago. But the project was handed off to another company called Meadow Run Development. Group hand, guess who's listed as a managing partner? Emily waited. A man named Spencer Langford. He's also one of the current board members of the Homeowners Association. Emily frowned. Langford. I think that's the same name Joe mentioned. He said a man in a black SUV had been coming around asking questions. That's the one, Rachel confirmed. Langford served on the zoning board around the time. Your grandfather's signature was supposedly notarized. It's possible he had access to internal documents and used that to push the development forward without following all procedures. Emily stood by the window, staring out at the distant resort buildings. They looked polished and professional, designed to impress. But behind the clean walkways and wellness centers, something much less tidy was buried in the paperwork. Do? You think he forged the signature? She asked. Rachel paused. It's hard to prove. But if we can show that the document was notarized without proper witness, then the land was developed over an active easement, we'll have leverage. They'll have to respond, especially if this goes public. Emily nodded, her voice firm. Then let's make it public. And with that, the pieces of the past began to line up, not as memories, but as evidence. Her grandfather's land still had a voice, and she was ready to speak for it. The following week was a blur of phone calls, scanned documents, and quiet determination. Emily and Rachel worked closely to build a timeline, one that revealed just how much had been decided behind closed doors while her grandfather's health declined. Emily spent long hours digging through old emails on her grandfather's computer, most of which were basic and routine. But in a folder titled Zoning Notices, she found an attachment from 2019, a town meeting agenda. Buried on page 3 in small print was a brief mention of a public hearing regarding potential annexation of parcels adjoining the Blue Willow development. One of the parcels listed matched her grandfather's lot number. There was no follow-up, no email thread, no confirmation that he had attended or responded. But what struck Emily most was the date. 3 weeks after her grandfather had been hospitalized. With complications from his stroke, he couldn't have shown up. He was barely able to speak at that time, let alone review legal documents. Emily sent the agenda to Rachel, who responded almost immediately. This changes things, Rachel said. They moved forward with the assumption that no response meant no objection. But that only works if the owner had the ability to respond. Emily was quiet for a moment. It's starting to feel like they waited for him to be sick enough not to fight back. Rachel didn't disagree at Rachel's recommendation. Emily requested a copy of the meeting minutes from that zoning board session. When the documents arrived, her hands trembled as she flipped through them. One paragraph stood out, with no objections recorded from parcel owner Thomas Carter. The board recommends approval for soft annexation into the Blue Willow development area. Motion passed 4-1. And below that, board members present, Spencer Langford, Rebecca Dorsey, Alan Kim, Howard Tran. There it was again, Spencer Langford. Emily pushed back from the table and stood by the window, staring at the tree line. The very people who stood to benefit from expanding the HOA were the ones who had approved it. And now those same names were part of the governing board responsible for managing dues, fees, and access. It wasn't just about money. It was about access, influence, land that was never fully theirs being treated as part of their project. Later that evening, Emily received a call from Mr. Mullins, the neighbor who had been by her grandfather's side for years. I did some thinking, he said. You remember that little town paper we used to get? The one that stopped printing a couple years ago? Emily smiled faintly. Yeah, Grandpa used to save the crossword puzzles. Well, I kept a few issues. I found one from the same month. They held that zoning meeting. It mentioned a wellness investment partnership forming between the town council and a private development group. Guess whose name was in the article? Langford, Emily guessed. You got it, Mr. Mullins said. He called it a win for the future of the community, said it would revitalize underused land and bring long-term value. Emily took a breath. He was setting the groundwork, okay? Making it sound like the land was just sitting here, waiting for someone to come along and do something useful with it. Well, Mullins replied, he didn't expect someone like you to come along and look under the surface. Emily hung up and forwarded the newspaper article to Rachel. Within minutes, her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Rachel. Let's set up a meeting with the HOA. We're not asking for answers anymore. We're demanding them. Emily looked down at her grandfather's old notebook, still open on the kitchen table. One note stared back at her. Protect the backacres. Now she understood why the decisions had been quiet, but the consequences were loud. It was time to make her own noise. The conference room at the Blue Willow Estates office was bright. Modern and quiet, too quiet, Emily thought. As she stepped through the glass doors with her lawyer, Rachel, by her side, 3 members of the HOA board were already seated at the polished oak table, flanked by folders and sleek tablets. At the head sat Spencer Langford, the same man whose name had appeared again and again in zoning board minutes, permit filings, and early-stage development plans. His expression was professional but unreadable. Thank you for meeting with us, Rachel said, setting her leather briefcase on the table. We have a few matters to discuss regarding Parcel 17C, formerly the Carter Farm. Langford nodded. We're happy to clarify any misunderstandings. We've reviewed the account, and our records show consistent notice and a signed agreement. Emily sat across from him, keeping her voice even. That's what I'm here to question. Because based on everything I've found, that agreement wasn't signed legally. And some of the land you're using may not be yours at all. Langford leaned forward. Miss Carter, with all due respect, the agreement was notarized, filed, and approved. That makes it enforceable. Rachel reached into her case and slid a document across the table. Actually, that's the first issue. This is a letter from the notary listed on the agreement, Laura J. Danning. She confirms she did not witness the signing. And she has no record of ever meeting Mr. Carter. Langford hesitated for a moment, eyes flicking to the paper. Emily noticed the man seated to his right shift in his chair. Rachel continued, her voice calm and clear. The document is likely invalid. That alone is enough to challenge any financial obligation tied to it. But we're not stopping there. She laid out another set of papers. It says a county-approved map showing the easement on the back of the Carter property. The gravel road was never sold, never released, and remained part of the estate. You paved over that without a proper title transfer. A beat of silence followed. Langford cleared his throat. It's common for easements to be absorbed during land development. The county rarely objects. Emily leaned forward. My grandfather did. You just never heard him because he was in the hospital when the meeting happened, and you moved forward anyway. Rachel spoke next. We've documented the timeline. The zoning board approved the annexation while Mr. Carter was medically incapacitated. That motion was led by members who now sit on this HOA board. There's a pattern here. Langford looked at the others. If there were errors in the process, I'm sure they weren't intentional. The community has grown from this project. People benefit from it. Emily met his gaze. Not the people who were ignored. The room stayed quiet for a moment longer. Then Rachel spoke with finality. We're filing a formal dispute with the county recorder's office and a notice of potential land misappropriation. That will pause any future development or collection activity related to Parcel 17C. We're also preparing a complaint for unauthorized land use tied to the paved easement. Langford shifted slightly in his chair but kept his tone controlled. That won't be necessary. I'm sure there's a way to resolve this without legal escalation. Rachel smiled politely. We're open to that conversation after the county finishes its investigation. Emily stood, gathering her papers. My grandfather left me more than land. He left me the right to protect it, and that's exactly what I'm doing. As they walked out, Rachel whispered, "You were perfect." In there, Emily didn't answer. Her mind was already racing ahead. There was still one more step. And if they weren't ready to offer a real solution, she was ready to take the next part of this story public. In the weeks that followed the meeting, Emily found herself caught between hope and frustration. The county recorder's office acknowledged receipt of her formal dispute and began their review of the documents and maps she had submitted. The HOA board remained quiet publicly, though Langford's name continued to appear in occasional news articles about local development. Emily spent hours at the farmhouse, revisiting the land with fresh eyes. The familiar sounds of birds and rustling leaves felt like a balm against the stress of legal battles and meetings. She knew this fight was about more than boundaries or money, yet was about legacy. One crisp morning, as golden sunlight filtered through the trees, Emily received a call from Rachel. "The county has scheduled a hearing next month," Rachel said, her tone brisk, but optimistic. "They want both sides to present evidence about the disputed land and easement." Emily sat back, absorbing the news. This is good. Better than good? It means they're taking this seriously. And it means you have a real chance to reclaim what belongs to your family. That evening, Emily returned to the kitchen table, where her grandfather's notebook still lay open to his last entry. Protect the Backacres. She traced her fingers over the words, feeling a deep connection to the man who had fought silently for the land all those years. As the hearing date approached, Emily's story began to attract attention in town. A local journalist reached out, intrigued by the unusual dispute over such a high-profile development. Emily agreed to share her experience, hoping the story would shine a light on the importance of respecting property rights and the value of days, and the value of community history. The article appeared in the town newspaper titled "Family Fights to Reclaim Farm from Development," and it sparked conversation. Neighbors stopped by the farmhouse, offering support and sharing their own memories of the land and her grandfather's kindness. The story reminded the community of roots and respect, of promises kept and promises broken. The day of the hearing arrived on a clear, brisk morning, the county meeting room filled with residents, lawyers, and local officials. Emily sat beside Rachel, holding the notebook that had become her anchor. Langford and the HOA legal team were there too, their faces carefully neutral. But the documents Emily and Rachel presented were strong evidence of the invalid notarization, the county-approved easement, and the timeline showing her grandfather's incapacity during key decisions. After hours of testimony and careful examination, the county board retired to deliberate. When they returned, the lead official spoke clearly. The board finds that the easement in question remains under the ownership of the Carter estate and was not legally transferred to the Blue Willow development. Furthermore, the agreement bearing the disputed signature does not meet notarization requirements and is considered invalid. A ripple of murmurs filled the room. The Blue Willow HOA is instructed to cease all collection efforts related to Parcel 17C and to enter negotiations with the Carter estate regarding land use and future development plans. Emily exhaled deeply. Her grandfather's land was hers, again legally recognized. Protected. In the following months, Emily worked with the county and the HOA to create a plan that respected both parties. Portions of the easement remained accessible to the community for walking trails, but development was halted on areas that belonged to the Carter family. Blue Willow Estates agreed to adjust their boundaries and update their records to reflect the change. More than that, the experience transformed Emily. She became a passionate advocate for land rights, speaking at town halls and helping neighbors navigate similar challenges. She organized community events on the farm, celebrating its history and the promise of its future. One afternoon, As Emily stood beneath the shade of the old oaks, she smiled, knowing her grandfather would be proud. The farm wasn't just land, it was legacy, and she would protect it always.